Um, we come to this passage today, and I don't know about you, but if you read this, you have to laugh at it a little bit. In fact, I quoted this scripture at my daughter this week as she was studying really hard. And she's studying really hard and kind of freaking out a little bit. And I quoted this. I said, "Hey, you need to stop so much study. You're going mad." Paul's on trial. I need to set the stage for you. Paul's on trial for heresy. He's been doing these things, and the Jews are saying that he's some lunatic, and he's not professing the faith anymore, and he's arrested and brought on trial and charges. And the interesting part is he's not just in front of, court. He's not in front of Polk County. He's not got a judge and jury of his peers in front of him. He's not even in front of the Iowa State Supreme Court. He's in front of King Agrippa, the governor, lieutenant governor, all the highest rankings of the state gathered. And Paul is there in chains. And if you go back to verse 1, you find Agrippa addresses him. He says, "So Agrippa said to Paul, 'You have permission to speak for yourself.' And Paul stretched out his hands and he began to make his defense." So, to put this in context, just so you have a little bit of a grasp of the setting, Paul is kind of sort of on trial. He's been told he doesn't have a lawyer, and he's making his own defense. And so Paul, he's a good speaker, so you don't have to worry too much. Paul's got the right answers. Paul's going to begin speaking and sharing, and he does, and he makes a good case. He begins by saying, "I'm just a good old Jewish boy." See, this will get you a long ways, right? You can start by, "I'm just a good old Jewish boy." You know what? He didn't say this, so he didn't say, "I've never done anything bad." No, in fact, Paul kind of talks about how he does things good. In fact, how he always follows the letter of the law. He's this perfect Pharisee and followed all of these things and done all these things right. So really, what's he got to be brought up on charges for? He even emphasized the fact that he's so good that he was one who he would persecute the Christians. In fact, he was intentionally going to Damascus to persecute the Christians when all of a sudden he had this encounter. And of course, we know the Damascus Road encounter, and he's blinded because he comes into the presence of Jesus Christ. And he begins to tell this story of his transformation and believing in Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of God. And Festus put it this way. He's still in the beginning opening statements of his argument, making a defense in front of the king, and Festus just hushes him, just stops him right there in the middle of his opening statement and says, "You should stop right now. You're mad from too much study." Now, I don't know about you, but I might stop at this point and say, okay, maybe I do need a lawyer. Maybe I should just stop talking for myself because, or maybe better yet, hey, you think I'm mad? Maybe I should take a plea of insanity, right? This will get me out of the situation I'm in. I could do that. Some of you have heard me preach enough. You might think that I'm mad occasionally. But what it made me do is it made me think, I need to look at this word a little more. This word that says that Paul is mad. Paul, you're out of your mind. Too much study is driving you mad. The Greek word is actually mania. Mania actually, any of you, what's it sound like? Oh, never mind, it's up there. Mania, maniac. It actually implies raving madness, frenzied, insane. Maybe you could just think of somebody so intense that all of a sudden you think, whoa, calm down, chill out. You are out of control, raving mad. Interestingly enough, this is the only place that it's specifically in the New Testament, actually in the Bible at all, this word, except for one other when it's used for Jesus. In John chapter 10, Jesus tells the parable, the story of the Good Shepherd, and he's explaining his role. And it's just after he gets done with this. In fact, this is the passage that we hear about Jesus telling them that he's the Good Shepherd. He says, "I have other sheep that are not of this fold, and I must bring them also. And they will listen to me, to my voice. So there will be one flock and one shepherd." Now, first of all, you need to understand, this in context of the Jewish society of the day, that was a little bit insane. Because up to that point, it was the only ones who were saved, the only ones who were righteous, the only ones who were, they were the children of God, who were the children of Israel. So for Jesus to say, I have other sheep, that was a little crazy talk. For Jesus to say that they would come in and there would be one shepherd and one fold, that was crazy talk. He goes on, he says, for this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. Okay, this is the point where they actually accost Jesus and said, hey, he's got a demon in him. He's got a demon, and he's insane. He's mania. You know, I look at this passage between John and between Jesus, and I begin to think to myself, you know those days that I get really intense and I start talking all crazy and people kind of look at me like, whoa, you're a little out there. I can actually tell myself I'm in good company. Jesus was mania. Paul was mania. And it's okay if I get a little mania on occasion because of this passion that I have for Christ. We find that this intensity, this passion, this fervor, if you will, actually makes people think you're a little out of control. But it's something that happens on the inside. You know, we've been talking about saints and the everyday saints, and we've been talking about how you begin, saints, no one is perfect, so not even the saints are perfect, so to be a saint, you have to understand you're not perfect. We've talked about loving and the importance of loving each other and all people. We've talked about the intensity of prayer and deep prayer and communication with God. This week, we're really digging into what does it look like to be a person of our time? And I think you're going to find, just like with Paul, just like with other saints, to really be engaged in community and in our world, we have to be a person of our time. Our mission statement, being Christ in community, that means we have to be relevant here, now, and today. You know, not just talking about stuff that happened 2,000 years ago, but how does it impact today? And isn't it important in these people's lives, in our lives? And how do we live it out? Let's talk about a couple of crazy people. Galileo. He was crazy. He had this idea, this heliocentric idea of the sun. The earth moves around the sun, right? This was crazy. He was considered insane and out of his mind. And in fact, he was put on trial by the Inquisition, and he was considered vehemently, heretically opposed to the gospel. Okay, Barry Marshall. Anybody know Barry Marshall? His nickname being the guinea pig doctor. He actually received a Nobel Prize in 2005 because he was convinced, by the way, he's just this obscure little Australian doctor, and he was laughed at. He was denied researchability because he had this idea that ulcers were not just caused by stress, but that some ulcers, it was bacteria. And he was convinced with antibacterial that he could actually cure some ulcers. But he was laughed at, and people rejected it because they knew that it was stress that caused ulcers. They had this barrier, this wall up that convinced them that there was no sense in even looking at this other option. Well, he was nicknamed the guinea pig doctor because he took an infection and gave it to himself. To get sick, to get an ulcer. And I don't know how many of you be that kind of crazy? That might be a little bit above my kind of mania. But he was so convinced that this was the truth that he had to prove it. And the only way to prove it was to take it on himself. And he took it on himself, and then he gave himself the medicine that he needed, the antibiotics that he needed to heal it. And he gained enough evidence between those two things to actually prove himself justified that he was right and receives a Nobel Prize for it. That's a little mania. Now, Saint Teresa, Mother Teresa, recently sainted. You know, we're talking about saints. Some people, you might not say that she's crazy in that kind of way, but I've known people to say that they could never do that. To live in poverty. To serve the poorest of the poor. Now, just to give you an idea, in case you don't know a whole lot of her history, 1950, she founded the Missionaries of Charity, and in 2012, it consisted of over 4,500 sisters, active in 133 countries. They run homes for those dying of HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis, and leprosy. They have soup kitchens, dispensaries, mobile clinics, orphanages, schools, on and on. But members must adhere to a vow of chastity and of poverty, of obedience, and a vow to give wholeheartedly to the free service of the poorest of the poor. And I know some people who would say that's just crazy. In fact, mindset in American society is that would be crazy. Why would I choose to live in poverty? Why would I choose to have nothing? Why would I choose to serve the poorest of the poor? That's a little crazy. And yet when we're looking at saints, when we're looking at people that have been sainted by the church or that we look at that have meant something powerful to us, we're looking at them and realizing that they gave of themselves so much, they sacrificed of themselves so much. They were persons of passion and conviction. They were able to sacrifice to make a difference. I'm going through these way too fast for you to have notes up there. By the way, these notes are also in your YouVersion Bible app. Make sure to check it out or hit those. Persons of passion and conviction. They were able to blank to make a difference. You know what that is? That's to sacrifice. I don't know about you, whether you think about it or whether you take the time to realize, or maybe you have to make a choice of, do I do this for myself or do I help someone else with this? That's called a sacrifice. There are people who do not live in the past. I can go even further with that, because to live in the past means that you're content with the answers that you have. Content with the situation of society and where you live. And just let that exist as it is. They're not people of the past. They're willing to move forward, to cross that bridge, to look beyond the wall that's built. They also don't live in a future utopian society. They understand that our current context is reality. They don't put on blinders and say, that everything is perfect the way it is. They realize that there's still changes that need to take place, still people that need to be cared for, still actions that need to be done to bring about equality, to bring about justice, to actually bring about hope, as St. Teresa would say, for the poorest of the poor. Instead, they give themselves to better the world that they inhabit. You know, when I look at this passage, I think to myself, what was Paul really so intense about? You know what Paul was really intense about? He wasn't standing there in front of the king making a plea to take the chains off, was he? He wasn't standing there in front of the king saying, hey, let me go, I've done nothing wrong. No, he's standing there in front of the king, and he's put all that behind him, and he's saying, no, I speak with truth, and I speak with good judgment. And then he turns the table, and he begins to make a case that they would all actually join him in his mania. He says, you may think that I'm crazy. You may think that I'm mad, but I hope by the end of the day, whether it's easy or whether it's difficult, that you would all be like I am. Paul was essentially inviting them to be a little crazy. Whether you realize it or not, most weekends when I'm preaching, I'm inviting you to be a little bit crazy with me. A little bit excited for Jesus. A little bit intense because of what God's done for you and what you know God has a hope to do for others. Paul is standing there in front of the king, and here's his words from verse 27 through 29 again. He says, King Agrippa, do you believe in the prophets? He doesn't even give him the opportunity to respond. King Agrippa, do you believe in the prophets? Oh, wait, I know you believe in the prophets. I know you believe. Verse 28, King Agrippa addresses Paul. He says, are you trying to persuade me to become a Christian so easily? Paul, I wish before God that whether easily or with difficulty, not only you, but all who listen to me today might become as I am, except for these chains. When was the last time that you had something that you were so convicted, so passionate about, that it didn't matter the circumstance you were in? It didn't matter the chains that bound you or the financial struggle that you were having or the situation with your job or family, but those things didn't matter because you're so mania for Jesus Christ. Paul teaches us that when we get so excited, so intense, so frenzied, so mad for our faith and committed to it, impassioned by it, that those other things really don't matter. Mother Teresa teaches us the same thing, that even though we have all the opportunities for blessing and opportunities for homes and for wealth, that those things are like shackles. But if we have a passion for Jesus, then caring for the least, the lost, the broken, the poorest of the poor, that's what matters. If you're convinced that you can heal people with ulcers, but you just need to actually show people that it takes antibiotics, you're willing to infect yourself because you're so impassioned by it. Maybe the question we should be asking ourselves is, to be a saint, are we willing to be imprisoned or enchained? Or are we just willing to put God first in our life? Are we willing to look just a little bit mad? And my answer generally is we don't. We're not comfortable with that. We'd rather put on the suit, dress up, look nice, keep everything on the outside just perfect as it is, rather than putting on the clothes of poverty. Rather than sacrificing something to give something else. Paul believed that he was in chains and he was in front of King Agrippa for a reason. Barry believed he was curing an ulcer and it won him the Nobel Prize. But Paul was offering to heal souls and save lives. And according to Scripture, that wins us the crown of life. What would you rather be a little bit mad for? My challenge to you today is to be a saint. Be a saint of our own time. Don't be blinded by the future, by that everything is perfect as it is. Don't be set apart from the past. Don't cling to it. But recognize those things that need to change so that you can make a difference, so that you can educate people, you can offer healing and hope, and you can make the world a better place. I don't know if you're willing to or even can conceive the concept of being in chains for Christ. But Paul counted it as a blessing in order that he could be put in places like this court with King Agrippa so that his words could reach the ears of those in authority. He was willing to sacrifice, willing to stay imprisoned, willing to live that kind of life so that in his madness, he could proclaim Christ. What are you willing to do to proclaim Christ? To be Christ in community? I hope you're willing to be just a little bit mad. Would you pray with me?